Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be joining us from across the world. My name is Kevin Rudd. I'm President and CEO of the Asia Society in New York. And today we are joined with a special guest during UN General Assembly Week, the high-level week, by the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, my good friend, Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi. The Foreign Minister is a person with a distinguished diplomatic career. Prior to becoming the Foreign Minister of the Indonesian Republic, Foreign Minister has been a career diplomat in the Indonesian Foreign Service for the previous 22 years, having served with distinction with a number of postings for her country around the world. Since 2014, through to the present, having been Indonesian Foreign Minister for the last 7 years, she carries the added distinction of being the first woman to occupy that position for the Republic of Indonesia. The Minister is an old friend of the Asia Society in New York, an old friend of the Asia Society across the world, and I've got to say, wearing my former Australian hat, an old friend of Australia as well. So here is our format for the day. I'm going to invite the Minister to make some initial remarks for 10 minutes or so. She and I will then engage in dialogue on some of the great topics of the day. And then, if you have questions to ask, they will come through our audience question collection system and come through to me, and I'll try and put those to the Minister before we close hard on 15 minutes to the hour. So we have the next 45 minutes with the Minister. So, Foreign Minister, welcome to the Asia Society. Welcome to our program. Over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin Rudd. Thank you very much for having me today. It is now 5 p.m. Eastern Time Zone, and I'm in New York for the high-level week of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. I know it is still very early in the morning in Brisbane, but I know you are always eager to discuss the current state of the world and Indonesia rules on it. So today I would like to highlight two challenges that the world is currently facing. First is, of course, about the COVID-19 pandemic. 18 months into the pandemic, the way we live, work, travel, and interact with each other continues to change. Many of us have to adapt with the new normal. So the fact that you have to wake up early in the morning, Kevin, just to have this meeting with us virtually is also due to the new normal. People keep asking, when will this pandemic end? According to the Director General of WHO, this pandemic will end when we choose to end it. It is in our hand. We have all the tools we need. Indeed, one of the most important tools is vaccine. The WHO has set a target of 10% of population of its country to be vaccinated by end of this month, 40% by end of this year, and 70% by mid-2020. And more than 6 billion doses of vaccine has been administered around the world, but almost 80% were administered in high and upper middle income countries, while only 2% were in Africa. Clearly, it is much more difficult for developing and least developed countries to meet this target in comparison to developed countries, of course. Millions of health workers in developing countries remain unvaccinated, yet several countries have already decided to offer booster shot for their population. So equal access to safe and affordable vaccine is critical. And COVAX facility is working very hard to narrow the global vaccination and enable access to vaccine for less developed countries. But there are just not enough vaccine for everyone. COVAX facility, doesn't produce vaccine, and the availability of vaccine depends on the capacity of manufacturers and policies of countries where manufacturers are located. So back to COVAX. COVAX has fallen nearly 30% short of its target to deliver 2 billion doses this year. Wealthier countries with an oversupply doses should fulfill their dose-sharing pledges immediately. And we also need to scale up global vaccine production and include developing countries in global vaccine supply chain. And this required strengthening of necessary infrastructure, research center, production line, storage facility, and human resources. So when it comes to export restriction on vaccine, raw materials, it must come to a stop. Technological transfer should be facilitated, including on the mRNA vaccine. We are also very concerned on the discrimination against certain vaccine and even politicization of vaccine. And if this kind of attitude persists, we will still be far from ending the pandemic. So we urgently need countries to demonstrate solidarity and cooperation. The longer we are in the pandemic, the longer time we need for the economic recovery. Mr. Rath, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the second issue that I would like to share with you today is on the maintenance of the international peace and security. We must be very careful and not let the pandemic divert our attention from our duty to preserve peace and stability. In fact, peace and stability are important enablers for robust cooperation against COVID-19 and swift economic recovery. In Southeast Asia, for more than 5 decades, ASEAN's role has been central in anchoring regional peace and stability by fostering trust and confidence between its members. This has enabled ASEAN countries to achieve many important milestones, including regional economic integration and mutually beneficial functional cooperation. And such tremendous strides would have not been achieved without what we call the ASEAN unity and centrality. So recognition for ASEAN unity and centrality is not a given. We have to remember that. It must be earned. And deeds, not words, are needed for ASEAN countries to maintain ASEAN unity and centrality and make it remain relevant. So ASEAN unity and centrality will always be tested in the face of crisis, both in Southeast Asia and broader Indo-Pacific region. In Southeast Asia, the test now, everybody knows it, is the political crisis in Myanmar. I believe ASEAN must be able to come together as one family to assist Myanmar and restore democracy. And we have to come together fast. The longer situation in Myanmar is left unresolved, the longer we put ASEAN credibility at stake. And the spillover of the crisis may also lead to regional security crisis, including massive influx of refugees from Myanmar to its neighbors. And indeed, Kevin, the situation on the ground right now is quite worrisome, both on political and humanitarian front. And following the unfortunate event on 1st of February 2021, I conducted my subtle diplomacy to a number of ASEAN countries to coordinate ASEAN response on the situation in Myanmar. This led to the ASEAN leaders meeting in Jakarta in April this year that agreed the 5 points of consensus to resolve the situation in Myanmar. But there is no sugarcoating it. The implementation of 5 points of consensus has been slow. After weeks of delay, the special envoy of ASEAN chair was finally appointed. However, the military has yet to grant full access for the special envoy to meet with all stakeholders. And without such access, it is impossible for the special envoy to facilitate inclusive dialogue in Myanmar, as set out in the 5 points of consensus. And let us not forget that the appointment of the special envoy is only one step mandated by the 5 points of consensus. Many more steps need to be taken to fully implement 5 points of consensus. So progress, I see here progress on the humanitarian front. ASEAN just sent the first batch of its assistance to Myanmar. And before end of this month, Indonesia will also send its own humanitarian assistance to Myanmar people. For Indonesia, of course, the safety and well-being of the Myanmar people is our top priority. And the humanitarian assistance must reach all people in Myanmar, including the Rohingyas. Now, let me share in the broader context, that is the Indo-Pacific region. The challenge to peace and stability manifests itself in rivalries between great powers. Tension, distrust between great powers did not abate during this pandemic, unfortunately. Instead, they escalate with each provocative rhetoric and action. And if we cannot manage this rivalry, it may destabilize our region. This past weekend, the UN Secretary General warned of a new Cold War. He underlined the need to re-establish functioning relationship between the great powers. And the most recent issues are related to the establishment of AUKUS and the Australia decision to acquire nuclear power submarines. Australia has explained the reason behind this decision and reaffirmed its commitment to uphold international law and its non-proliferation obligation under NPT. What we all do want to see are increasing arms race and power projection in the region. And all countries must demonstrate its commitment toward peace and stability in their engagement with our region. And against this backdrop, Mr. Rat, ASEAN must reaffirm its position as the anchor of regional peace and stability in line with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And last year, I still remember very much, amidst the heightening great power rivalries, ASEAN foreign ministers issued a joint statement that underlined the importance of principle embedded in ZOPFAN and TEC for regional peace and security. And such unified message is important to strengthen ASEAN centrality and encourage constructive engagement of ASEAN external partner through ASEAN-led mechanism. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, moving further outside our region, it is the situation in Afghanistan that demands our attention. Let me tell you that Indonesia has always been one of the strongest supporters for peace talk in Afghanistan. And we focus since the very beginning on the two building blocks. One is the ulamas is Islamic scholars, and then the other one is on women. Why ulamas? Because ulamas hold important influence in the society. Therefore, it is very important for ulamas to be supportive to the peace process and call for an end to the violence. And I recall very much in 2018, to be more exact, I think May 2018, Indonesia hosted the Trilateral Ulamas Conference in Bogor to promote the role of ulamas in realizing inclusive peace in Afghanistan. So ulamas from Indonesia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan participated in the meeting. And then in 2020 and 2021, we plan to host another Ulama's conference, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were not able to do so. Indonesia is also committed to empower Afghan women to take ownership of their destiny. And we encourage them to take part in the peace process and provide them with a capacity building in the field of the economic empowerment. Because we firmly believe investing in women means investing in peace and investing in a brighter future. Kevin, I was in Kabul last year to inaugurate Indonesia-Afghanistan Women's Solidarity Network as a platform for experience sharing to enhance the role of women in the society. This is what we have been doing until the recent changes in Afghanistan, and we intend to continue our contribution. And prior to the formation of the new caretaker government, I met Taliban in Doha. It was on the 26th August. And during the meeting, I highlighted the importance of ensuring an inclusive government, respect for human rights, particularly for women, and preventing Afghanistan from becoming a breeding and training ground for terrorism. So it is vital for the international community to stand together as one voice to support these messages. And Indonesia will maintain its line of communication and continue our engagement to send messages of hope from the world. And it is our interest to have a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. And there are at least 3 potential threats to anticipate, all with bearing on Indonesia, namely terrorism and radical ideology, human trafficking, and narcotics. And at the same time, we also have the responsibility to address humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. On Indonesia's part, we are committed to provide humanitarian assistance and capacity building programs in sectors where women participation is critical. And there are 3 potential flashpoints in our region and beyond. And commitment of all parties is key to ensure that these flashpoints do not escalate into a bonfire that we cannot put out. So, Mr. Rad, Kevin, I think that is all from me, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih, Minister. It's been great to have those remarks from you today. It's important the way in which you've addressed these core challenges of the pandemic, vaccine equality, as well as the challenges to peace and security that you've outlined as well. Led, of course, by ASEAN's legitimate preoccupation with developments in Myanmar, the global crisis that, in fact, has been triggered by the Taliban takeover in Kabul and the consequences, both humanitarian and human, as well as the most topical and recent development, which is the Australia-UK-US agreement on nuclear submarines, nuclear-powered submarines for Australia. Minister, Indonesia is an important country in the region and in the world, and in 2022, Indonesia assumes the chairmanship of the G20. This is important for our region. We look forward to the Indonesian presidency, but it's also important for the world. On the question of vaccines and vaccine diplomacy, will your president, will your country, and will yourself be bringing particular initiatives to bring about greater equality of vaccine distribution to the world through the time in which you are in charge of the leadership of the G20?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think that is a very important issue that you brought up to me, Kevin. That is about the vaccine equality, whether Indonesia will take up during the presidency of Indonesia in the G20 next year. Well, if you look at all the statement and discussion where Indonesia participated, especially on the vaccine, there was a very consistent message from Indonesia that we are concerned on the gap, the gap between the gap on vaccination. I mean, I presented to you the data that 80% of the vaccine are registered or administered in the developed countries, while, for example, Africa is still very low. If we want to talk about the economic recovery, then we have to settle to bridge the gap of vaccine. And that is, I think, one of the issues that raised by the Secretary General of the UN on his opening statement on the UNGA today. So the longer we are not able to close the gap on vaccination, the longer the economic recovery will materialize. I mean, when we talk about the economic recovery, means economic recovery for all, not only for a certain countries. So for sure that during the G20 presidency, Indonesia will bring along this issue, because the big theme of the Indonesian presidency in the G20 is recover together, recover stronger. So recovery is one topic, but inclusivity is another important message that Indonesia would like to send during the presidency of the G20. And when we talk about the presidency on the G20 of Indonesia, Indonesia is committed not only to bring the interests of the member of the G20, but we are committed to bring also the interests of the developing countries, including the small island state in the Pacific. So we will give attention to the Pacific as well, Mr. Roy. So I think I answer your question whether Indonesia will bring the issue of vaccine equality on the G20 presidency. The answer is yes.
Well, thank you so much, Minister. You also touched, of course, on Myanmar in your remarks and the ongoing, not just political challenges, but the state of the economy, the humanitarian challenges, and the rolling problem, crisis, and humanitarian concerns for the Rohingya. There have been reports in the last few days that there have been calls for armed struggle against the new military regime in Naypyidaw. There's also been reporting that there have been calls on Aung San Suu Kyi to add her voice of support to this call for armed struggle. And a further report that Aung San Suu Kyi herself has declined to oppose the call for armed struggle. Given these are very delicate and difficult issues within the domestic politics of a very large country in Southeast Asia with a large population, what would be your reflections on this, Minister, in terms of preserving domestic peace and avoiding further violence within the country?
Well, since the very beginning, Indonesia always sent the message that the well-being, the safety of the people of Myanmar is priority number one. I stated in my statement. And we mean it. Why we mean it? Because after all, what we are doing is for the people. And how to reach or how to see, to create or to make the safety and well-being of the people materialize is one of them is to restrain from using violence, because I think violence will not benefit anyone, of course. So restrain from using force and violence should be part of the main measure that should be respected in Myanmar. Because if there is violence, use of force, then back to the question whether the safety or well-being of the people of Myanmar will be fulfilled. While in the ground, what we see is on the humanitarian situation that is not getting better in Myanmar. So I'm very happy to see that ASEAN is already took decision to send the humanitarian assistance. Mid-September we started, and we channel it through the Myanmar Red Cross in cooperation with the IFRC, because again, it is in line with the priority of Indonesia, priority of ASEAN, that the safety and well-being of the people is number one. And we really hope and encourage all in Myanmar to be part of the solution.
Thank you, Minister. As part of that process, we also are dealing with the reality of the safety and well-being of Aung San Suu Kyi herself. I assume both you as Minister and our colleagues in ASEAN and across the international community would also want the regime in Naypyidaw to understand that her continued physical safety and well-being is important to the international community as well. So again, I'd invite your reflections on that aspect before we move on to discuss some other peace and security questions, including my own country, Australia. Back to you, Minister.
Yeah, well, I remember very much when we are in Jakarta for the leaders' meeting. I think during the discussion, some leaders clearly also mentioned about the safety and the well-being of all, including the Daw Aung Suu Kyi. It's very clear. And even when we talk about the inclusive dialogue, then we are also thinking about Daw Aung Suu Kyi. Inclusive is inclusive, all stakeholders is all stakeholders. But the message is very clear. I think the message is very clear that the safety, well-being of all is important. So when you mention about Daw Aung Suu Kyi, well, it applies also for Daw Aung Suu Kyi, and in Jakarta, some leaders mentioned clearly about it. And even some leaders in Jakarta also mentioned about the release of political prisoner.
That's important in very complex challenges we face with regional peace and security, Minister, but also the personal security of leaders. So thank you for those remarks. Minister, I've been looking carefully at Jakarta's five-point statement on the 17th of September dealing with the Australia-United States-UK agreement, which now has a new acronym, AUKUS. And in the five-point statement from the Indonesian government, there is a clear reference to Indonesia's concern about the potential impact of decisions on regional arms proliferation and an arms race in Asia. And secondly, you're raising questions about the compatibility of this agreement with the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation between Australia and ASEAN, which of course underpins institutions such as the East Asia Summit and the Kuala Lumpur Declaration of 2005. So, Minister, on the regional arms race and your specific reflections on this Australia-UK-US agreement and nuclear submarines, would, I'm sure in this gathering, appreciate your further reflections.
Well, thank you very much to bring that question. 2 weeks ago, or even not last week, because last week I was already in US, before leaving the country to go to the US, I received Foreign Minister of Australia and the Defense Minister of Australia, because Australia and Indonesia, we have the 2+2 meeting mechanism. We meet once in a year in the formation of 2+2. So during the 2+2, the Foreign Minister of Australia mentioned that there will be announcement But at that time, we didn't receive any information, to be more exact, what sort of announcement, because I assume at that time when we met, it is not final yet. And then a day before the announcement, defense minister reached my defense minister, and Marie's Minister Payne reached me. She texted first, and then we talked, and she explained about the reason why the decision is taken. So while understanding the reason behind the decision and reading, listening to the explanation, including the commitment to uphold the international law, the NPT, non-proliferation, and commitment to contribute to the peace and stability in the region, then I mentioned to my good friend Maurice that Indonesia is really hope that the Australian will fulfill that commitment. And then when it comes to the TEC, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, there is one very important point in the TEC. That is the commitment to cooperate with countries both with and outside Southeast Asia in furtherance of world peace, stability, and harmony. That is a very important point in the TEC, and we also remind Australia as part of the TEC on this very important point in the TEC. What we are worried is that the decision will trigger the increasing arms race and power projection in the region. In my statement, I mentioned about in the last 50 years, ASEAN is able to be the locomotive of peace and stability in the region. And we want to continue this role because I think everybody needs peace and stability, not only for us, but also for the future generation. But it is not only ASEAN who can maintain peace and stability in the region. Our partners, we do hope also to contribute to the maintenance of peace and stability in our region, especially in Southeast Asia. So that's why we have so many mechanisms in ASEAN, ASEAN-led mechanism, the EAS, the ARF, the IDMM. We have so many mechanisms. That is actually the mechanism that bring together ASEAN and partners to talk. Because discussion by talking, hopefully that we will be able to address the issue that we are facing. How difficult the issue is, as long as we can talk, I think it will help us a lot. So once again, we listen carefully the explanation from Australia, and we do hope that all the explanation, all the commitment will be fulfilled, not only by Australia, but also by AUKUS, because Indonesia concern is only, again, the peace and stability in the region.
Well, thank you, Minister, for those remarks. I think the 2+2 arrangement with Australia I'm deeply familiar with, and this is a good mechanism for maintaining the stability of our excellent bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Australia over many years now. And defence ministers and foreign ministers meeting on a regular basis. And the fact that you have a good and close relationship with the Australian Foreign Minister is, I think, of benefit to all Australians. Of course, there's been separate frictions in this country, Australia, in terms of earlier notifications to other countries of this decision, not least France. But it's important that this has been part of the discussion. Minister, you just referred to, in your earlier remarks, to ZOPFAD, and I'm old enough to remember ZOPFAD, Zone of Peace and Freedom from Nuclear Weapons in Southeast Asia. Does this underpinning concept of ZOPFAD still inform ASEAN security policy and Indonesia's view of a nuclear-free Southeast Asia? And how does that impact on this particular decision announced under the AUKUS framework? Back to you, Minister.
Well, thank you very much again. It relates to the decision of the AUKUS to have the trilateral security arrangement, plus, of course, the decision on the nuclear power submarine. The commitment, I have to repeat what I had mentioned about the commitment of Australia to uphold the NPT and non-proliferation becomes very important when you mention about ZOPFAD. And it is also very important for ASEAN to see that Australia is really fulfilling the commitment. You know, it's good. I mean, as good friend, the good thing is that we can speak openly. We can discuss openly the situation, the bilateral relation, and other issues between Indonesia and Australia. So once again, ZOPFAD, what we want is to be respected fully, and we listen very carefully the commitment of Australia to all the ASEAN, what is that? The ASEAN setting, the TEC, ZOPFAD, the ASEAN mechanism, and in short, we really wish that Australia will fulfill its commitment.
Thank you very much, Minister. You have importantly touched upon the plight of women in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And can I commend you for your leadership on this question? Indonesia is a proud Muslim nation, a majority Muslim people, and therefore the role which Indonesia plays within the Islamic conference around the world is important. Many member states of that institution, more than 50, and therefore many of us, given recent developments in Kabul and the sudden American withdrawal, have been deeply anxious about the policies to be pursued by the Taliban across human rights in general, and about the particular role of women. Minister, again, bearing in mind Indonesia's important emerging global leadership role through the G20, but also your role through the International Islamic Conference, the thoughts that you have in terms of making sure that the Taliban are aware of wider sentiment across the international community and across the Muslim world about respect and the proper treatment of women, and not just in Kabul, but outside of Kabul as well.
Right. Well, sometimes a certain group of people said that the issue of women empowerment, respect to the women's right, is only the issue of the Western countries. I said no. The women's issue, the women's right issue, is the issue of human right. Human means man and women. And I always take my example when we discuss about women, and especially coming from the largest Muslim country. I said that, look, I am a woman, I'm a Muslim, and I'm coming from the largest Muslim population in the world. And you see in Indonesia that the space that I have is exactly the space that my colleagues, my brothers in Indonesia also have. So if there is some quarters, some groups that try to contradict women's rights, women's empowerment with Islam, I don't think that I will agree with that. On Afghanistan, as I mentioned in the statement, we focus on two, and one of them is on women empowerment. And we established the network, the Indonesian network with Afghanistan in women. And routinely, every year, we bring along women to listen from each other experience, because we do believe that women is part of solution in any situation. When there is women, they can be part of the solution. Let me take one example. During the pandemic, you will see that the frontliners, the medical workers, the majority are women. In Indonesia, the economy, the SMSEs, especially those who produce the health products needed during the pandemic, the antiseptic, the mask, the others equipment is produced by SMBs that own and operates by women. So if you invest in women, actually you invest in your country, invest in a nation, invest for young generation, and invest for your future. And of course, invest in peace and prosperity, because the role of women in the economy in Indonesia, as I mentioned, is really significant and obvious. So we really want to continue to empower women, to enable women to always be part of the solution. The question is also, are you willing to give space to women as you give space to male or men? And for Indonesia, we are more than ready to have that.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. And in a personal capacity, could I encourage you to take an early visit to Kabul? I think it would be very useful for the Taliban to meet such a prominent Muslim woman as foreign minister of her country, and to understand that she stands in solidarity with the women of Afghanistan. This would, I think, convey a powerful message to those who now are in control in Kabul. Minister, I'm very conscious that you have a very hard stop at 1:15. I have one simple question from which is burning from many questions in the audience, and you don't only need to comment on this for a minute or two, but a particular plea from an audience member to remember the Rohingya and to have those close to the heart of ASEAN's diplomacy and the engagement with the military regime in Kabul. In Naypyidaw. So, final reflections on that, Minister, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah, well, this morning I met with the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh because, and I think we will have a meeting on Rohingyas. So I will make a statement on the meeting on the Rohingyas. There is two issues actually now when we talk about the Rohingyas. How is the safety and the well-being of the Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar during the pandemic, and how is their future in the Rakhine State? For Indonesia, it's very clear that Myanmar is the home for the Rohingyas. So while we try to address the issue in Cox's Bazar, especially how they deal with the pandemic. We have also to prepare when will be the right time for them to return to Rakhine State. Because again, Myanmar is the home of the Rohingyas. Mm-hmm. With the political crisis, we are afraid that the attention will be distracted and then the attention to Rohingyas will lessen, which Indonesia always remind all of us that, look, there is one big homework related to the Rohingyas. So ASEAN will continue its work to help the repatriation, to prepare the repatriation of Rohingyas back to Rakhine State. I recall that it was in 2018 or 19, I forgot what is the exact year, but ASEAN has deployed the preliminary need assessment team, the PNA. And the plan is actually to send the comprehensive need assessment team in 2020, that's just before the pandemic. But it's very unfortunate that the pandemic came and we have to postpone the deployment of the comprehensive need assessment team. But rest assured, Mr. Ruth, that the issue of Rohingya will remain there, and we will never forget the Rohingyas brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much, my good friend Retno. Thank you so much for your leadership on this with the Rohingya and your solidarity with the women in Afghanistan, but also your extraordinary leadership in foreign policy for the Republic of Indonesia. We regard you as a close friend of the Asia Society. We wish you well in your personal and professional career. And we look forward very much to talking to you and to your president more during the course of 2022, when Indonesia becomes chair of the G20. Wishing you all the best for the rest of UN Week, and may you get some sleep, because I know it's a precious resource in UN Week.
Okay, thank you very much once again for having me. You stay well.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you.